is an honor to welcome everyone here tonight. And first and foremost, I would like to thank Paul and Karen Levy for hosting this wonderful Levy Forum series. This is our second year, and we want to thank you for your generosity and for bringing such important speakers to speak about the most critical issues of the times that we're facing, especially now. And I also want to say that we're very honored that Paul and Karen will be one of our honorees at this year's 30th Gala Anniversary of the Palm Beach Synagogue, and we look forward to honoring them as well. It is my pleasure to call upon Mr. Paul Levy to open up tonight's evening.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming. Take my glasses off. And especially let me thank Ayaan for making the long trip from London. I want to thank Michael Poliakoff, from whom you'll hear briefly after me, and ACTA in particular for making this event possible. Very thank you. Thank you so much, Rabbi Scheiner, for welcoming us so warmly to Palm Beach Synagogue. As is said in the 23rd Psalm, our cup runneth over. It's nice to have so many people here. It's a great crowd. Palm Beach Synagogue, open to all, is becoming a crossroads in Palm Beach for not only spiritual growth, but intellectual inquiry. That's why we're here tonight. We have some exciting speakers in our forum this year. Each of them is always of interest, and their views are always timely. But with the events of the world weighing so heavily upon us all, every speaker, especially Ayaan, is of even greater interest tonight. While dialogue in the world is contracting and too many are receding into parochial identity groups, now is the time for open discourse, the theme of our series. If, and I do mean if, there is a silver lining to world events, it is bringing people of goodwill together. All of us are talking more and are realizing more than ever how much we need one another. I hope you all enjoy tonight's program and return over the next few months to hear George Will, Glenn Lowry, John Bolton, and Bernard-Henri Levy. Again, thank you for coming, and now let me introduce Michael Poliakoff, who is the head of ACTA.
Thank you, Paul. The American Council of Trustees and Alumni, or ACTA for short, in its 28th year, is blessed to have Paul on our board of directors, and we're blessed to be partners with Rabbi Scheiner and his colleagues, and I'm feeling very blessed by having my colleagues from ACTA with me tonight. A couple of quick announcements. Please be sure to take copies of the publications with you that we put on the table in the back. ACTA had the privilege in 2016 of presenting its annual award to Ayaan Hirsi Ali and her husband, historian Neil Ferguson. We brought for you copies of their inspiring speeches. And if we run out, which is a high probability, we've got some sheets on the back. Just leave your names and addresses and we'll mail them to you promptly. And please help us to continue the mission of ACTA to strengthen higher education. The freedom of speech and opinion that we enjoy here tonight is far from certain at too many American college campuses, and that exacts a grave toll on our nation. The battle is on to turn this threat back, and ACTA is fighting that battle every day. Please support our mission. I've taken the opportunity, indeed the liberty, of putting literature on the back table that will tell you how you could join one of our donor societies. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Ayaan Hirsi Ali. It's a great honor to introduce her. She is, to cite the book of Proverbs, a woman of valor. Her courage and dedication to freedom summon us to defend the values of the West. Escaping in 1992 from the domination of fundamentalist Islam and an impending forced marriage, she fled to the Netherlands, obtained political asylum, and 11 years later was elected to Parliament. She worked with Theo van Gogh on a film that exposed and criticized the treatment of women in Islam. His brutal assassination by a Muslim terrorist did not deter her advocacy for the rights of women in the Islamic world. The list of awards that she has won for her defense of liberty and women's rights is very long. It includes joining Time magazine's list of the 100 most influential persons in the world. We're very fortunate to have this woman of valor and the board of her foundation with us today. Please join me in welcoming Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you, Paul. Thank you, Rabbi Scheiner. I am absolutely grateful and delighted and privileged to be here tonight among friends, good friends, longtime friends, and new friends, but also among like-minded people. I was a Muslim who came to the West in 1992 and assimilated. My response to 9/11 and the threat of Islamism was very different from the responses of many Western leaders over the years. I lost my Muslim faith and recognized the challenge Islamism posed to Western institutions and values. While Western political leaders, mired in the ideology of multiculturalism, failed to address the threat adequately. More than 2 decades after 9/11, we see massive demonstrations on the streets of Europe and the United States in favor of the antisemitic, genocidal, Islamist butchers of Hamas. We see 3 presidents of the most renowned universities in the United States, Harvard, Penn, and MIT, testify before Congress and refuse to say that calling for the destruction of Israel and genocide against the Jews violates campus rules, hiding behind the studied talking point that it depends on the context. We see in the United States anti-Semitic incidents go up by 400%. This number is from a report published on October 25, so I assume that it's actually much more. How on earth did this happen? What's the solution to this moral and intellectual rot? Many of you might be familiar with my story, so I'll keep it as brief and to the point as possible. But I think it offers some perspective on our current predicament. I was born in Somalia. I spent my formative years there and in Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, and Kenya. I was part of a clan culture where the bloodline mattered above everything else. My clan uncles were there to help us out with schooling, food, and money wherever we went. There was no escape from the clan, which was also in many ways a microcosm of Islam, the dominant religion of Somalia. Many of the clan rules, especially for women, were the same, and sometimes they were drawn from the strictures of Islam. The clan network helped my family to survive. My father, an anti-government dissident, relied on them for support, and the clan was at times generous and hospitable, and at times vicious and brutal, especially where the unwritten code of honor was violated. This was the case for girls. I was raised as a Muslim girl. I attended Quran school, and according to the values of my clan and my religion, I carried out the back-breaking domestic labor. Girls and women are there for marriage, for breeding, and for household chores and nothing else. Girls were seen as problems. My grandmother had a single son and 10 daughters. Do you know how she described them? She used to say quite openly, "I have one son and 10 problems. Girls were a burden, and the misogynistic culture of the clan and Islam was enforced by women as much as it was enforced by men. I, like the majority of other Somali girls, underwent female genital mutilation, or purification as it was described. That should tell you all you need to know about the status of women in my native society. Clan life based on Islam was a life of violence. I was beaten constantly as a child, and for many years, I thought that this was normal. Death was also normal. People died all the time of violence and of disease. From Allah we come and to Allah we return was a phrase I heard constantly. To this day, when filling out medical forms that ask about my family history of cancer and such things, I find myself unable to answer. Death was such a common occurrence in my early years that we barely bothered to inquire into its causes. When I was a teenager, living with my family in Kenya, along came the Muslim Brotherhood, incidentally, the Islamist group that spawned Hamas. The Brotherhood offered something more. It offered a life of service to Allah. I felt a glorious purpose. We had a mission to convert people to the true Islam. There was intellectual nourishment, or at least that's what I thought, because we were required to study the Quran and the Hadith. We were a community, a true brotherhood, united with a divine purpose. And Islamism went further than the passivity in the face of death that I had grown up with. It embraced death. To die for Allah was the most wonderful thing I could imagine at that age. I would be guaranteed a place in paradise. It was through clan life, the Muslim Brotherhood, and my Islamic schooling that I became an anti-Semite. The worst insult in the Somali community was to be called a Jew. Not that any of us actually knew one. To be called a Jew was so abhorrent, some felt justified in killing anyone who so dishonored them with this slur. I vividly remember sitting with my female fellows in mosques, cursing Israel and praying Allah to destroy them. We were certainly not interested in a peaceful two-state solution. We were taught to want to see Israel wiped off the map. The elimination of Israel was not a matter of if, it was a matter of when. For us as Muslims, Israel did not represent a territorial dispute. To want Israel's destruction was an act of worship. To entertain notions of a two-state solution was an act of sin, a transgression, a betrayal of God, His Prophet, and the Ummah. When I was 16, my teacher of religion was Sister Aziza. She read to us the Quran's lurid descriptions of the everlasting fire that burns flesh and dissolves skin, the place reserved for Jews, their eternal home where they belong. Our religious teachers described Jews as physically monstrous, with horns coming from their heads, out of which flew devils that would corrupt the world. Jews controlled everything. They told us, and it was the duty of Muslims to destroy them. We made no distinction between liberal and Orthodox Jews, or between Jews who settled Palestine and those who opposed the settlements, between religious or atheist Jews. We also made no distinction between adult Jews and children, male, female, mothers, old and young. To us, Jews were Jews, all of them evil and all of them enemies of Islam and all that's good, true, and decent. Our mission was to single-mindedly destroy them through prayer, through propaganda, and for those lucky enough to have the means, to kill them. It was a lot to take in for a teenager who read Western romance novels in secret. But to my shame, I believed those things. Much later, I fled to the Netherlands to escape a marriage arranged by my father to a man in Canada. Looking back, I recalled the violence, hatred, and discord of the societies I had grown up in. I was shocked by my new home in Holland. It was radically different from anything I had known. Here in Holland, there was a separation between religion and politics. Women had equal rights and could live independently and make their own choices. There was a concept of the common good that I had never known before. There was no talk of death, no enemies to fight or pray against, and no bloodline or religion that could only be defended by waging war. The more I understood about this new society, the more I liked it and admired it. I assimilated. I lived life as a Dutch woman, suppressing the dissonance I felt at betraying my religion and upbringing. I abandoned the ideas of Islamism, and I educated myself on antisemitism. But then 9/11/2001 happened, and Osama bin Laden was frank about his motivation. He despised the West. This forced me into a crisis of belief, and I had no other choice but to leave Islam, to be fully intellectually honest with myself. As I became more and more involved in politics and activism, I watched with great interest and even greater dismay as Western leaders responded to Islamism. They chose to believe that bin Laden and his Islamist ilk did not mean what they said. They chose to believe that multiculturalism was the solution. But I saw that multiculturalism was really an embrace of clanism and primitivism. It segregated Muslim immigrants into ghettos and allowed them to subject women to arranged marriages, Sharia law, and other abuses. Another baffling Western response was to engage with nations such as Saudi Arabia and Pakistan to help them assimilate their Muslim immigrants. The Netherlands and other European countries asked them to help deal with Islamist terror. Yet, Saudi Arabia was for many years the world's biggest funder of da'wah, that is, Islamist proselytization. Domestically, Western leaders listened to Islamist infiltrators with an agenda, whom they naively saw as moderate representatives of Muslim communities. When asked about how to integrate Muslims in the West, these so-called community leaders unsurprisingly demanded separate Muslim schools, separate media platforms, separate courts, and a victim status to be protected from Islamophobia. In other words, the more the West tried to appease and collaborate with Islamism, the more the Islamists rewarded them with aggression and terror. And yet, they kept on with these wrong-headed approaches to the problem. When I left Holland for the United States in 2006, I hoped that America had learned from European failures. America did a better job of hunting down and destroying terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. But America barely understands the concept of da'wah, or the web of Islamist outreach, propaganda, and web of charities that end up financing Hamas and other terrorist networks. America also fails to deter the Islamist regime of Iran, having bought into the false posturing of that regime, to enter into negotiations to stop its nuclear program. Now, on the internet and on Western soil, Islamist networks of recruitment and funding are entrenched. As Sam Westrop of Focus on Western Islamism has recently discovered, over $260 million are sent through the 501c system to Hamas-aligned charities in the United States, provided by corporate foundations, employee giving schemes, partisan community groups, and a powerful array of Islamist grant-making foundations that make use of a largely unregulated nonprofit sector. $260 million. Just think about what Hamas is doing with that. It's shameful that this is allowed, and all because Western leaders fail to understand the true nature of Islamism and failed to understand it more than 20 years ago. To return to Holland, I recently co-wrote an article for the Free Press, very wise, with my long-term Dutch friend, Evelyn Marcus, about how Islamism has poisoned what was once a great nation. Here are a few examples. During the Second Intifada in Israel, which began in 2000, Muslim immigrants from Morocco and other North African countries started beating up Jews in Amsterdam and elsewhere in Europe out of quote-unquote solidarity with Palestinians. Some of our friends were attacked. Week after week, stones were thrown at Jews on their way to synagogue. Yet, these crimes barely made the news. Another example, in the years after it was commonplace to hear Hamas, Hamas, Jews to the gas, chanted in the soccer stadiums by thousands of fans, some of them Moroccan Muslim immigrant kids, during the 2 minutes of silence in commemoration of those who were killed in World War II. Another example, Jew and Cancer Jew became popular slurs on the streets of Amsterdam, not Mogadishu, but Amsterdam. This sort of thing is now common, not only in Europe, but also in the United States. Witness the shocking mob attack last Sunday on Goldie's, a restaurant in Philadelphia owned by the Israeli chef Michael Solomonov. How did we get here? And is there hope for the future? In election after election, Western elites have reasserted their commitment to multiculturalism. And even when some leaders, for example, the former UK Prime Minister David Cameron, the former Chancellor Angela Merkel, even when they dissented from this view, they never followed up with action. They did not pursue aggressive programs of assimilation, nor did they reform immigration. Things just kept going on as before. However, ordinary working and lower middle class people, on whom the burden of multiculturalism ultimately falls, have finally rebelled against the establishment. As Geert Wilders' shocking victory in Holland has shown, I shall stick with Holland as an example. While political and media leaders told the public that opposing migration was xenophobic, ordinary people noticed structural changes in their country and felt that they hadn't been adequately consulted. In the 1960s, 60,000 Muslims lived in the Netherlands. Today, there are around 1.2 million. Now, the 1.2 million is the official number, and I will tell you to take official numbers with a very large grain of salt. But let's give them the 1.2 million. This is thanks to a chain migration, asylum, and a higher birth rate. Do you know how many Jews live in the Netherlands? It's less than 50,000. While political elites told the public to be tolerant of Islam, in keeping with a long-standing tradition of religious tolerance, ordinary people saw that Islamists were increasingly well entrenched in the country, a point even made by Dutch intelligence officials. The post-October 7 pro-Palestinian demonstrations in Dutch streets, which, as elsewhere, were sometimes violent, may have been the final straw that led to Wilders' landslide victory. He was polling at about 12 seats on October 6, and after the election, he got 37 seats in a parliament of 150. It's worth noting that Wilders' voters do not fit a crude stereotype. He won the most votes of any party among voters between the ages of 18 and 35. So perhaps there is hope. Ordinary people are resisting the old, mainstream, liberal consensus, and perhaps the old elites will start listening. No longer, when voters complain about immigrant ghettos where women are effectively enslaved, or about their community and sports centers being turned into Islamist headquarters, will politicians be able to dismiss them as racist. No longer will they be able to repeat mindlessly the mantras of toleration and multiculturalism. They used to say integration is a two-way street. At least I hope this will be the case. The demographic crisis noted above is a worry. I fear that Bernard Lewis's prediction of a majority Muslim Europe by 2050 might still materialize. If it does, the Islamists will rejoice, for they have entrenched themselves so deeply and so widely that their vision for Europe will be the one that's adopted. Yusuf al-Qaradawi, a famous Islamist preacher in Qatar, he predicted, "We will conquer Europe, we will conquer America, not through sword, but through dawah." Meanwhile, Western societies are still torturing themselves over their supposedly irredeemable evil histories. The woke revolutionaries who have infiltrated all of our institutions want to tear down what has taken centuries to build. Because of this creeping cultural suicide, the West is in no position to resist the threat of Islamism. Instead, barely 80 years after the Holocaust, we allow anti-Semitic, genocidal thugs and their apologists free rein on our streets. Bin Laden must be smiling in his water grave as Gen Z TikTokers idiotically praise his evil rantings. The only solution is to sound the alarm and to restate the Judeo-Christian Western values that have benefited us all so much. We must be loud in speaking up against the wrong-headedness of the policies of our elites. We must be proud of our heritage, and we must champion it. We must show Gen Z that the world would be a dystopia if the Islamists won. We must show them that the world built by Western values over the centuries is infinitely superior to the hellish visions of the Islamists. We must also elect leaders who understand the existential crisis faced by the West and who are willing to act to address it. In short, we must fight for our values wholeheartedly and unashamedly. Only then will we have a chance of saving the West. I have seen the alternatives to our society. I have lived in that Islamist dystopia, and I do not wish to see our society make the same terrible mistakes. The wonderful societies I found in 1992, which immeasurably improved my life, seem to be vanishing before our very eyes. Let's act before it's too late. Thank you.